Hey, 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 hey. Trundle Talks, it's Trundle Talks, it's Trundle Talks, it's Trundle Talks.
Hey everybody, welcome to Trundl Talks. This is the third episode of the second season, and I'm your host Sajit Nair. Now, today we're going to be talking to Cliff Pollan. He's a co-founder of a company called Welo, which is basically branded as a new place to work. It's an online office for hybrid teams where they practice agility. So let's dive in. Welcome, Cliff. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Now, before we begin, I would like you to quickly give a 30-second pitch of Welo. What is Welo?
Well, for us, it's this very exciting opportunity to give people a new home. We all miss our office. We actually really loved it, but we loved it because it created community and connection. And that community and connection enabled us to really work together well. So Welo is that concept in a virtual setting where people can come together, be together, and work together. So it's very different than most things people have seen. So I would encourage them to go experience it because it's very hard to describe at some level.
For sure. And that fits perfectly because that's the topic of today's conversation. The topic is staying remote. How is that becoming a new normal? And when we are talking about working remotely, tools specifically that help us connect with each other become very crucial. So let me start with the first question that I wanted to know your reaction on. Has pandemic really changed the way that we are working? Because we had been using tools earlier as well, but how did it change when the pandemic hit?
I think it has changed, but I think more what it's done is create a foundation for change. So I think, in fairness to all of us, I think we were all holding on, and the tools enabled us to continue working, but it became very transactional. I love what Satya Nadella of Microsoft said, which was, we're more productive, but our mental health, we're eating up all our social capital that we've built with our teams, and we need a way to replenish that. So I do think it's created a concept that we can work as distributed teams, we can work, whatever you want to say, remote, hybrid, and we've been doing that with each other. But we are suffering from Zoom fatigue and other pieces. So I think it's laid a foundation for a better way. But I'm also quite cognizant that many people are feeling losses, and some much more extensively than others. People who have family members that they've got to think about and take care of. Yeah. And they're trying to, quote, juggle that with everything else. So we are in a pandemic, so I don't want to create that it's been incredibly simple. This hybrid work makes us more productive. I think it has in certain cases, but we can't miss everything that we're all sort of, living through and hopefully coming closer to the end of. But I think it's this foundation for change that is the real piece. And let me just say that what I mean by foundation for change is that we can work in a distributed fashion, that people following, I think, in Agile, which is still after 20 years largely contained in software development, can be used across an entire organization to empower organizations, and that where you sit will not be critical, but we can have life-work balance, we can help our climate, we can even increase the accessibility of different things by embracing this. So that's the foundation I think we've created.
Interesting that you mentioned the video call fatigue and how important mental health, because it has really impacted it, in ways that we probably will take ages to understand and comprehend, because we're still sitting inside closed doors. Or what's the responsibility that falls on tools like Welo to make it, a little easier for those users?
So I think what we need to do, and and you love the existing technologies, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whether it's Slack. I think those have been, we wouldn't have been able to continue on Google Meet without all of those sort of capabilities. But when I think back, those two things, they're very transactional in what they do. We have a Zoom meeting, we're off and we're sitting by ourselves. Our Slack conversations or our texting with each other. But again, they feel more transactional. So I think the responsibility of the tools is to try and figure out how we create an experience and actually build culture and create an environment where you don't feel alone. So, and I don't want to, what we've tried to do is you're with your colleagues. And when you finish stand up, you're with your colleagues and you see them. No, it's not the same as us all, being arm to arm, but that hasn't been the case for years. Not everybody was in the same location. So I think the responsibility is to think about culture, connection, and a real feeling of being together and how you support that going forward.
Perfect. And I would want to understand, how did Welo came into being? Like, was it an idea that generated from a requirement that was coming towards your way, or was it like a different, how did it come into existence?
Yeah, I think about this and, like most, founders and co-founders, there's some things in each of our history that lead there. So I first worked in a co-working facility starting in 1980.
Okay.
Okay, so I was in an office. I had moved from New York City to Minnesota, but I was still with the company that I was in New York, and I ended up in a shared facility. I was the only employee for the company in that area. And eventually my office was actually in New York City, and I had responsibility there for a team of 50 and another 50 spread across the United States. And so all of a sudden I was alone, but I had to figure this out. So one was that co-working, sort of experience of feeling a community in that group. And we were doing, the 12 of us that had these offices were in completely different businesses, but we bonded and learned from each other. So that was part of the experience. And that concept that you had to create team across geography was something that I thought about a lot. And then with my co-founder, like many things, we took a run at this and got success, but the technologies weren't quite there. We couldn't quite create the experience that we wanted to. And the way I remind myself of that is that I keep an Apple product on my desk. It's an Apple Newton. The Newton was a predecessor 10 years before the iPhone. And they didn't get it quite right, but they had the right idea. My Newton still works, believe it or not. So it came out of this passion, I think, about also, we wanted to make work better, and we wanted to make it better for everybody. And I think that life-work balance piece and how we actually could attain it, but also create all the wonderful things that I think a good Agile sort of learning ecosystem does, was at the heart of us creating it.
Cliff, what about when the world comes back to normal, or whatever that normal is? How do you think it is going to impact the way that we are using these tools now? Will we be too reliant on these when we go outside as well? Or do you think there's a hybrid environment that is need of the hour once, things get a little better, restrictions get, lenient? How would that hybrid environment work?
I think we're going to embrace a hybrid environment. And I think this is going to be different than we've ever seen before. And I think there's some different forces that are driving most companies to say, we're going to be hybrid. And I think what those are is, and I'll start with a financial one. All of a sudden the C-suite is looking at it and saying, our people have been pretty productive. We are really worried about innovation and we're worried about their health, but they've been pretty productive. And you have CFOs saying, we don't need all this office space. And that's an enormous savings. And you have HR people saying, we need to honor our employees. This whole thing of coming to the office 5 days a week and asking people to balance family and commutes and all of those things has probably been a false narrative, and we need to embrace it. So one, I think there are factors that say we're going to be hybrid first. And I think that term of hybrid first immediately says we need an opportunity for a new generation of tools to try and create that capabilities. So I will share I will date myself, but I saw the original picture phone at the 1964 World's Fair that was rolled out by Bell Labs. And that was what Zoom is. It's a picture phone. I don't mean that it scales, it's phenomenal, but we need sense of place. So I think it is with us. I think we're going to embrace it because the C-suite sees it. I think we're going to embrace agile mindsets because companies see that if they are not self-adapting, they're gonna fail. So I think you have 20 years of agile with hybrid work, with a C-suite, but importantly with employees really wanting this, that's going to change that whole work environment. And I do think, and everybody's working on this, that there needs to be a new set of tools, capabilities, and practices that we embrace.
Perfect. I think those are the questions that I had, Cliff. Thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Thank you. This has been just such a pleasure.
Hey, hey.